In March of 2021, the global economy held its breath. The intricate, globe-spanning machine of commerce that we all depend on. The machine that gets food to our stores and parts to our factories, ground to a halt. Why? Was it a war? A stock market crash? A natural disaster? Nope, it was a boat. One boat, the Ever Given, a container ship so comically massive it was longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall, got stuck. It performed a spectacularly clumsy three-point turn in the Suez Canal, one of the most critical arteries of world trade, and lodged itself sideways. For 6 days the world watched, mesmerized. We saw the satellite photos, the frantic news reports, the hilarious memes of that one tiny little digger trying its best to free a 200,000-ton behemoth. And for those 6 days, an estimated $10 billion of trade just stopped. Every single day. It was a global-scale shenanigan. But the real story isn't the boat. The real story is the thousands of colorful, identical boxes stacked on its deck. This is the container. And it is, without exaggeration, the most important invention of the 20th century. Forget the internet. Forget the microchip. Forget nuclear power. This boring metal box is the reason you're wearing the clothes you're wearing, eating the food you're eating, and living in the world you're living in. Welcome to Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. Today we are talking about the shipping container, an invention that didn't just change the world, it broke the old one completely, and then rebuilt it in its own image. And it all started with a very, very impatient trucker. To understand the revolution, you first have to understand the world before the box. You have to understand the sheer, unholy chaos of a mid-20th century port. Today we think of shipping as clean, automated, almost robotic, but for thousands of years, from the age of the Phoenicians to the 1950s, the process was brutally, primarily manual. It was called break-bulk shipping, and it was a logistical nightmare. Picture a ship arriving in port in, say, 1950. It's filled with a wild assortment of goods. Barrels of whiskey from Scotland, sacks of coffee from Brazil, crates of machinery from Germany, rolls of textiles from India. Nothing is standardized. Every item is a different shape, a different weight, a different size. And waiting on the docks is an army of men. Longshoremen. Tough, hardened men who had one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Their job was to go into the dark, sweltering hold of that ship and, using nothing but their own muscle, hooks, and basic pulleys, unload every single one of those items, piece by agonizing piece. Imagine trying to pack for a month-long vacation, but instead of using a suitcase, you just throw every individual sock, shirt, pair of shoes, and tube of toothpaste into the trunk of your car one at a time. Then imagine having to unload it the same way. Now multiply that by a 20,000-ton ship. That was break bulk. A typical ship could take a week or more to unload and reload. An entire week spent just sitting at the dock, burning money. The labor costs were astronomical. But the biggest cost was the time. For shipping companies, a ship at port is a ship not earning. And the system was riddled with problems. Damage was rampant. Crates were dropped. Sacks were torn. Theft was so common it was practically part of the business model. Longshoremen would help themselves to a bottle of whiskey here, a side of bacon there. It was an accepted, if unofficial, perk of the job. It was, in short, a mess. An expensive, slow, dangerous, and unreliable mess. For centuries, this was just accepted as the cost of doing business. The greatest minds in shipping focused on building faster, bigger ships to shave a day or two off the ocean voyage. But they were missing the point. The real bottleneck, the most expensive part of the entire journey, wasn't the thousands of miles at sea. It was the last 100 feet from the ship's hold to the dock. The world was waiting for a revolution, but it wouldn't come from a shipping magnate or a naval architect. It would come from an outsider, a guy who knew nothing about boats, but knew everything about being stuck in traffic. His name was McLean, and in 1937, he was a 24-year-old trucker from rural North Carolina. He wasn't a visionary, not yet. He was just a guy with a truck, hauling goods to and from the port. And one fateful day, he was sitting in his truck cab at a dock in New Jersey, waiting for the cotton bales he was hauling to be unloaded from his truck, and then painstakingly loaded, bale by individual bale, onto a nearby ship. He waited. And waited. The sun beat down. The longshoremen worked at their grueling pace. And as the hours ticked by, a simple, profound, almost childlike thought popped into his head. Wouldn't it be easier if my entire truck trailer could just be lifted up and placed directly onto the ship? That was it. That was the spark. Not a product but a system. A system where the cargo never has to be handled. A system where the box that travels on the road is the same box that travels on the sea. A system that was seamless. Intermodal. It was a brilliant idea, and for the next 20 years, absolutely nothing happened. McLean was a trucker, not a tycoon. He spent the next 2 decades meticulously building his trucking company into one of the largest in the entire country. But that idea, that dockside epiphany, never left him. He knew the world's biggest logistical problem wasn't on the roads, it was at the water's edge. So in 1955, Malcolm McLean did something crazy. He sold his hugely successful trucking company for millions. He was set for life. He could have retired to a beach somewhere. Instead, he took all that money and plunged it into a world he knew nothing about. He bought a small, struggling shipping company called Pan-Atlantic Steamship Company. Then he went to work, turning his 20-year-old idea into a reality. He bought 2 World War II-era oil tankers and had them refitted with a reinforced deck, a suez spar deck, designed to hold big metal boxes. He worked with engineers to design the box itself, a standard, 35-foot-long, theft-proof, stackable steel container. He designed the locking mechanism that would secure them to the truck chassis and to the ship's deck. He was building not just a box, but a whole new set of Legos for the world of trade. The industry veterans, the old sea dogs of the shipping world, thought he was insane. A trucker telling them how to run their business? They laughed at him. They called his strange-looking ships McLean's Folly. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson. On April 26, 1956, a converted oil tanker named the Ideal X sat at the port of Newark, New Jersey. On the dock next to it sat 58 of Malcolm McLean's new containers. A crowd of shipping executives, union officials, and skeptical longshoremen gathered to watch the show. Then, the cranes started moving. One by one, the containers were lifted from their truck chassis and lowered into place on the ship's deck. It was a smooth, mechanical ballet. In just a few hours, all 58 containers were loaded. The ship was ready to sail. Normally, loading that much cargo using breakbulk would have taken days and a small army of men. McLean's system did it in a fraction of the time, with a fraction of the labor. The numbers were staggering. Before McLean, the cost to load cargo was about $5.86 per ton. With the container, McLean calculated the cost at just 16 cents a ton, a cost reduction of over 97%. When the Ideal X sailed for Houston that day, it wasn't just carrying cargo, it was carrying a death sentence for the old way of life. And nobody knew this better than the longshoremen. This brings us to the great shenanigan, the great conflict at the heart of the container story, the brutal fight between efficiency and employment. The longshoremen's unions were some of the most powerful in the country. They controlled the waterfronts, and they saw, with perfect clarity, that this box was designed to eliminate their jobs. And so they fought back. Hard. For more than a decade, the adoption of the container was slowed by violent strikes that shut down ports for months on end. There were protests, sabotage, and political battles. The unions fought for rules requiring that every container be unloaded and reloaded by longshoremen at the dock, a practice called stripping and stuffing, which completely defeated the purpose of the container. It wasn't just the unions. The whole system was built for breakbulk. Ports didn't have the massive cranes needed to lift the containers. Their waterfronts were a tangle of finger piers, not the massive, open aprons of land needed to store thousands of boxes. Shipping companies didn't want to spend millions on new ships. Railroads and trucking companies had their own standards. McLean's box was a brilliant idea, but it required the entire world to change its shape to fit it. The revolution was stuck in the mud. It needed a push, a massive, undeniable, system-shocking push. And it would get one from the most unexpected customer imaginable. By the mid-1960s, the United States was escalating its involvement in the Vietnam War, and it was facing a logistical catastrophe. The US was trying to supply an army on the other side of the world, and it was doing so using breakbulk shipping. The port of Saigon was in a state of permanent gridlock. Hundreds of ships sat anchored offshore for weeks, sometimes months, waiting for a berth. Once they docked, supplies were unloaded in the old, chaotic way. Ammunition, food and medicine would sit for weeks on the docks in the tropical heat, getting damaged, spoiled, or stolen. It was a disaster. The military needed a solution, and they found it in Malcolm McLean's company, which was by then called Sealand Industries. In 1966, the government awarded Sealand a contract to run a fully containerized shipping route to Vietnam. It was the perfect, large-scale test case for the system. McLean built a state-of-the-art container port at Cam Ranch Bay. Suddenly, supplies could be loaded into secure containers in California, shipped across the Pacific, and delivered directly into the war zone, safe and accounted for. What had taken over a month to process through the old system now took a matter of days. The Vietnam War became the ultimate, undeniable proof of concept. The government's adoption of the container standard forced ports, railways, and trucking companies to finally adapt. The resistance was broken. The revolution was finally, unstoppably, underway. And this is where our story turns. Because the container didn't just make shipping cheaper, it fundamentally broke the economic and geographic logic of the entire planet, and then rebuilt it. This is where we see the unintended consequences, the real shenanigans that echo to this day. First, and most importantly, globalization. With shipping costs plummeting to almost nothing, the distance between a factory and a customer became a minor detail on a spreadsheet. A company could now manufacture a television in Japan, a sneaker in South Korea, or a toy in China, and ship it to a store in Ohio, for less than it would cost to make that same item in a factory down the street. This was the single biggest catalyst for the explosion of global manufacturing. It hollowed out the industrial heartlands of Western countries, and created the manufacturing powerhouses of East Asia. The world of Made in China is a world that was quite literally built by the box. Second, the death of the waterfront. The container didn't just eliminate the longshoreman's job, it eliminated his entire world. The old finger piers of Brooklyn, the docklands of London, the Embarcadero of San Francisco, they were all rendered obsolete overnight. They weren't big enough for container ships, they didn't have space for the thousands of containers. So shipping moved. It moved to vast, new, purpose-built ports with massive cranes and acres of pavement, like the port of Newark or Long Beach. And the old waterfronts? They died. Tens of thousands of jobs vanished. The vibrant, gritty, working-class communities that surrounded them withered. For decades, these areas were derelict ghost towns, only to be rediscovered much later by real estate developers, and turned into the luxury condos and parks we see today. And finally, the rise of the big box store. The modern world of cheap, abundant consumer goods simply could not exist without the container. The business model of a Walmart, an IKEA, or an Amazon is predicated on the ability to source goods from anywhere in the world at the lowest possible price and move them efficiently. Malcolm McLean's box made that model possible. It created the culture of consumerism we live in today, a world where a new television is a casual purchase and a closet full of clothes is the norm. So the next time you see a truck on the highway hauling one of those corrugated steel boxes, or a train pulling a mile-long line of them, or a news report about a ship stuck in a canal, take a moment. Don't just see a box. See the frustration of a trucker in 1937 who was tired of waiting. See the death of an ancient way of life on the docks of New York. See the birth of the globalized economy, and the silent, invisible system that brings almost every single object in your life to your doorstep. The container is the circulatory system of the modern world, a world of unimaginable complexity and incredible fragility, all held together by a standardized set of Legos, invented by a man who just wanted to get home for dinner a little bit faster. It's the greatest 20th century supply chain invention, and once you see one, you will start seeing them everywhere. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe for more fascinating stories about the global supply chain's impact on our daily lives.